What if your DNA remembers things you've never experienced? What if the myths your ancestors told around fires 10,000 years ago aren't just stories, but memories, encoded in the very structure of your genes? Across every continent, cultures separated by oceans tell the same stories. A great flood that destroyed the world. A serpent that brings both knowledge and chaos. A tree that connects earth to the heavens. 7 sisters who became stars. These aren't coincidences. They're too specific, too consistent, too ancient. Science called it impossible. Then we discovered that trauma can alter DNA, that experiences can be inherited, that memory isn't just in your brain, it's in every cell of your body. Welcome to the most profound mystery at the intersection of genetics, archaeology, and mythology. This is the story of how the cosmos remembers itself through us. In 1875, Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung proposed something radical: the collective unconscious. He suggested that beneath our individual minds lies a deeper layer of psyche shared by all humanity. This collective unconscious, Jung argued, contains archetypes, universal symbols and patterns that appear in myths, dreams, and art across all cultures. Jung noticed something extraordinary. Patients who had never studied mythology would dream of symbols that appeared in ancient texts from cultures they'd never encountered. A man in Zurich would dream of the same dragon that haunted Chinese legends. A woman in New York would envision the same cosmic tree described in Norse mythology. How? Jung proposed these symbols were inherited, not through culture, but through something deeper, something biological. For decades, scientists dismissed this as mystical nonsense. Memory, they insisted, couldn't be inherited. Experience doesn't change DNA. Each generation starts blank, learning everything fresh. But then, in the early 2000s, something changed. Researchers discovered epigenetics, the science of how experiences can modify gene expression without changing the DNA sequence itself. These modifications can be passed to offspring. Trauma experienced by grandparents can affect grandchildren who never met them. In 2013, a landmark study at Emory University showed that mice trained to fear a specific smell passed that fear to their offspring who had never encountered the smell before. The memory was inherited. If mice can inherit the memory of fear, what can humans inherit? Could our ancestors' experiences, their traumas, their triumphs, their encounters with catastrophic events be encoded in our genome? Could myths be the conscious expression of genetic memory? Today, we're going to explore the most pervasive myths in human history and examine whether they might be memories, real events experienced by our ancestors, passed down not just through storytelling, but through the very molecules that make us human. Because the evidence suggests something extraordinary. The cosmos has found a way to remember itself, and we are its memory. Let's begin with the most widespread myth in human history, the Great Flood. Over 200 cultures around the world have flood myths. Not just any floods, a world-destroying deluge that wiped out civilization, with only a handful of survivors who rebuilt humanity. The details vary, but the core narrative is eerily consistent. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, written around 2100 BCE, tells of Utnapishtim, who survived a flood sent by the gods by building a great boat. The biblical story of Noah and the Ark, written centuries later, contains such similar details that scholars believe they share a common source. The dimensions of the boats are nearly identical. Both release birds to find land. Both ground on a mountain. But it's not just the Middle East. Hindu texts describe Manu surviving a global flood warned by a fish avatar of Vishnu. Chinese legends speak of Gun Yu controlling the great floods. Greek mythology tells of Deucalion and Pyrrha surviving a deluge sent by Zeus. The Aztecs believed humanity had been destroyed by floods multiple times. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime speaks of a great flood that reshaped the land. The Inca, the Maya, the Sumerians, the Egyptians all have flood stories. These cultures had no contact when these myths formed, yet the stories are too similar to be coincidence. Anthropologists have suggested that floods are common enough that every culture would experience them and naturally mythologize them. But that doesn't explain the specifics, the global scale, the handful of survivors, the divine warning, the boat, the new beginning. So what really happened? Geology provides a stunning answer. Around 12,800 years ago, the Younger Dryas period ended abruptly. Within decades, global temperatures rose dramatically. Massive ice sheets covering North America and Europe melted catastrophically. Sea levels rose by more than 120 meters, almost 400 feet. Coastlines where humans had lived for millennia vanished beneath the waves. This wasn't gradual. Geological evidence suggests periodic pulses of catastrophic flooding. Meltwater Pulse 1A raised sea levels by 13 to 20 meters in less than 500 years, possibly much faster in certain events. The Black Sea deluge hypothesis proposes that the Mediterranean breached into the Black Sea basin around 5600 BCE, flooding thousands of square kilometers in what would have seemed like an apocalypse to anyone living there. If you lived on the coast 12,000 years ago, and most humans did because coasts provide abundant resources, you would have witnessed the world ending. Your village would have been swallowed by water. Everything you knew would vanish. Only those who fled to higher ground, perhaps on boats or rafts, would survive. Here's where it gets profound. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, have existed for at least 300,000 years. We've been behaviorally modern, with language, art, complex thought, for at least 50,000 years. We survived the transition from the Ice Age to the Holocene. We witnessed the catastrophic floods. And if epigenetics is real, if traumatic experiences can modify DNA and be inherited, then perhaps the memory of this global catastrophe is written into our genome. Perhaps flood myths aren't cultural contamination or coincidental invention. Perhaps they're genetic memory surfacing as myth. Think about it. Every human alive today descends from the survivors of that catastrophe. Those who didn't flee the coasts, who didn't build boats, who didn't heed warnings, they died. They aren't our ancestors. We come from the ones who remembered, who prepared, who survived. And maybe, just maybe, they passed down more than stories.
Maybe they passed down the memory itself, encoded in the epigenetic modifications to their DNA, expressed through our collective unconscious as the most persistent myth in human history.
The serpent appears in mythology with such frequency and consistency that Carl Jung called it a primordial archetype. But serpent myths don't just appear randomly. They follow patterns that suggest shared origin. In the Garden of Eden, the serpent brings knowledge and causes humanity's fall from paradise. In Hindu mythology, the Nagas are serpent deities associated with water and wisdom. The cosmic serpent, Shesha, supports the universe. In Norse mythology, Jormungandr, the world serpent, encircles the earth. In Mesoamerican cultures, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, brings knowledge and civilization. Australian Aboriginal rainbow serpent myths describe a creator being that shaped the landscape and gave laws. In ancient Egypt, the serpent Apep represented chaos, while the Uraeus serpent symbolized divine authority. Chinese dragons, essentially sky serpents, brought rain and wisdom. The Greek Ouroboros, a serpent eating its own tail, symbolized eternity and renewal. Why serpents? Evolutionary psychology offers one explanation. Humans evolved with a deep fear of snakes because they were a genuine threat to our ancestors. Our brains are wired to spot snake-like patterns instantly. This could explain snake prevalence in myths. They're evolutionarily significant. But that doesn't explain why serpents specifically represent wisdom, transformation, and cosmic order across unconnected cultures. Why is the serpent so often associated with water, with creation, with the boundary between worlds? Some researchers propose something remarkable. The serpent represents DNA itself. Jeremy Narby, an anthropologist who studied Amazonian shamanism, noticed that ayahuasca visions often featured intertwined serpents, precisely the shape of the DNA double helix. Indigenous shamans described these serpents as the source of all knowledge, the blueprint of life. When Narby showed them images of DNA, they said, "Yes, that's what we see." Is it possible that deep intuitive knowledge of our own genetic structure, experienced through altered states, dreams, or some form of biological self-awareness, manifests as the serpent archetype? That the cosmic serpent is humanity's mythological expression of the molecule that defines us? The serpent transforms. It sheds its skin and is reborn. DNA replicates and mutates, creating endless variation while maintaining continuity. The serpent is immortal, yet ever-changing. DNA is the immortal chain connecting all life, modified by experience through epigenetics, yet fundamentally continuous since the first cell. In myth, the serpent brings forbidden knowledge. In reality, DNA contains the forbidden knowledge, the complete instruction set for creating and running a human being. We're only now learning to read this knowledge, to understand what our ancestors perhaps intuited through the collective unconscious. If genetic memory exists, then perhaps the serpent archetype is memory remembering itself. DNA creating a symbol of DNA within the human consciousness it generates.
The cosmic serpent is the genome looking at itself through the mirror of mythology.
Now we enter truly strange territory, because some myths seem to encode not just earthly memories, but astronomical ones. The Pleiades, a cluster of stars known as the Seven Sisters, appears in mythology across the globe with disturbing consistency. The ancient Greeks told of seven sisters pursued by Orion. Australian Aboriginals tell of seven sisters fleeing a man. The Japanese call them Subaru, seven sisters. The Aztecs saw them as a handful of seeds. North American indigenous tribes saw seven maidens. The Maori, the Persians, the Hindus all saw seven sisters. Here's what's strange. Today, only 6 stars in the Pleiades are easily visible to the naked eye. The seventh is much dimmer. Yet cultures worldwide speak of 7 sisters, with stories explaining why one is hidden, lost, or dimmer than the others. How did they know? Some researchers suggest ancient humans had better eyesight. Others propose the 7th star may have been brighter in the past, but there's another possibility. These stories are incredibly old. Aboriginal Australian oral traditions about the Pleiades have been dated through geological references to at least 10,000 years old, possibly much older. These aren't vague stories. They describe specific landscape features that existed before sea levels rose, before climate shifted. Their memories encoded in myth, passed down through hundreds of generations. If humans can remember the Pleiades with such accuracy across millennia, what else might be encoded in mythology? In 1963, Professor Charles Hapgood proposed that ancient myths might preserve memories of pole shifts, catastrophic changes in Earth's rotational axis. While his specific theories weren't supported by geology, the underlying idea is fascinating. Could myths preserve memories of astronomical events our ancestors witnessed? The answer appears to be yes. In 2017, researchers demonstrated that Aboriginal myths accurately described volcanic eruptions and landscape changes from over 7,000 years ago. Oral tradition, combined with genetic memory, created a historical record more durable than any written text. Consider what our ancestors witnessed. Around 12,000 years ago, the younger Dryas impact hypothesis suggests Earth may have been struck by fragments of a disintegrating comet. The skies would have blazed with fire. Impact winters would have followed. The climate would have shifted dramatically. Modern humans lived through this, and they remembered. Not just in stories, but potentially in their DNA. Epigenetic research shows that stress and trauma create biological markers that affect how genes are expressed. These markers can persist for generations. If your grandmother survived famine, your metabolism may be different because of epigenetic changes she passed down. If your ancestors survived cosmic catastrophe, what markers did they pass to you? Perhaps the collective unconscious Jung described isn't metaphorical. Perhaps it's literal. A biological database of ancestral experience, encoded in epigenetic modifications, accessible through dreams, visions, and the myths we tell. When we look at the stars and feel a strange familiarity, when certain constellations seem to whisper ancient names, when we tell stories about 7 sisters in the sky, we might be accessing memories that aren't ours, yet belong to us completely. We are the universe remembering itself. Through genetic memory, the cosmos preserves its own history in the only medium that survives across deep time.
Myths alone prove nothing, but when mythology aligns with archaeology and genetics, patterns emerge that demand explanation. Let's examine the archaeological record through the lens of genetic memory theory. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to 9600 BCE, predates agriculture and settled civilization by thousands of years. Yet it required organizational capacity, astronomical knowledge, and engineering skill that supposedly didn't exist. How did hunter-gatherers build such a complex site? One possibility, they weren't starting from scratch. Göbekli Tepe might represent the rebuilding of knowledge after catastrophe. The survivors of the younger Dryas flooding and climate chaos would have possessed the memory, possibly both cultural and genetic, of more sophisticated earlier societies. They rebuilt what they remembered. Genetic studies support this. Analysis of ancient DNA shows population bottlenecks, sharp reductions in human population occurring around the younger Dryas period. Humanity nearly went extinct multiple times, but we survived, and survivors carried genetic markers of that survival. A 2018 study found that epigenetic changes from the Dutch famine of 1944 to 45 persist in grandchildren born decades later. These descendants have different metabolic profiles, different disease susceptibilities, different gene expression patterns, all because their grandparents experienced starvation. If 2 years of famine creates markers that persist 3 generations, what would 1,000 years of Ice Age hardship create? What would witnessing the sky on fire and the earth flooding create? What genetic memories do we carry from the last time human civilization nearly ended? The archaeological record shows something fascinating. Mystic motifs appear simultaneously across vast distances. Pyramids emerge in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and China. Different cultures, no contact, similar structures, all oriented astronomically. Why? The diffusionist explanation says there was contact we haven't discovered. The independent invention explanation says humans naturally build this way. But genetic memory theory offers another possibility. They were remembering. If pre-catastrophe civilizations built such structures and memory of these achievements persisted through genetic encoding and oral tradition, then post-catastrophe humans might independently reconstruct similar forms, not through contact or coincidence, but through inherited memory surfacing as intuitive knowledge. Rock art from around the world shows similar motifs: spirals, concentric circles, grids, zigzags. Neuropsychological research shows these are entoctic phenomena, patterns generated by the human nervous system itself, seen during altered states of consciousness. They're universal because they're biological. But some rock art depicts things that shouldn't exist. Extinct animals accurately rendered, celestial events, possibly even aerial phenomena. Aboriginal Australian rock art shows accurate depictions of animals that went extinct 40,000 years ago, suggesting oral traditions and possibly genetic memories preserved detailed knowledge across deep time. The genetic evidence is compelling. Studies of human migration patterns show we carry DNA from multiple extinct human species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, possibly others. We literally carry their genetic memory. When we dream of ancient hunts, of creatures that no longer exist, are we accessing their memories, preserved in the genes they gave us? Modern neuroscience reveals that memories aren't just electrical patterns, they involve epigenetic modifications. Learning changes how genes are expressed in neurons. If these modifications can be inherited, then memory truly is genetic. What does this mean for mythology? It means the collective unconscious isn't a metaphor, it's a database. Every human carries within their genome the accumulated experiences of their ancestors, disasters survived, knowledge discovered, traumas endured. Myths are the user interface to this database. Through story, symbol, and archetype, the conscious mind accesses biological memories stored in genetic code. The flood myths are real memories. The cosmic serpent is biological intuition about DNA. The seven sisters are astronomical observations passed through hundreds of generations. We are walking libraries of ancestral experience, and myths are how we read that library.
If myths carry genetic memory, the implications transform how we understand human history and consciousness itself. First, it means oral traditions deserve scientific respect. Indigenous peoples who say their stories go back to the dream time, to the time before time, to the age when the world was different, they might be literally correct. Their myths might preserve accurate information about events from 10,000, 20,000, even 50,000 years ago. Second, it suggests human civilization is far older than we've acknowledged, not necessarily more technologically advanced, but more ancient in its sophisticated culture, astronomical knowledge, and symbolic thought. The younger Dryas catastrophe may have reset human progress, but genetic memory allowed faster recovery, humans rebuilding what their bodies remembered, even if their minds had forgotten. Third, it reveals consciousness as fundamentally connected across time. You are not separate from your ancestors. You carry their experiences within you. When you dream of floods, of serpents, of stars, you may be experiencing their memories, their fears, their awe. This has practical implications: post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression. Some percentage may be genetic echoes of ancestral trauma. We're treating symptoms without understanding that some psychological wounds are inherited, written into our epigenome by catastrophes we never personally experienced. But it also means we inherit resilience. Our ancestors survived impossible odds. They witnessed apocalypse and rebuilt civilization. They passed down not just trauma, but strength. Every human alive descends from survivors of ice ages, climate shifts, megafaunal extinctions, volcanic winters, and cosmic impacts. We are the children of those who endured. Fourth, it offers a bridge between science and spirituality. The collective unconscious Jung described is real. It's epigenetics. The ancestral wisdom indigenous cultures speak of is real. It's genetic memory. The connection we feel to ancient myths is real. They're our own memories surfacing through the fog of deep time. Finally, it suggests the universe is conscious, not metaphorically, but literally. Life is how the cosmos remembers itself. Every organism is a memory storage device, preserving information about past conditions and passing it forward. Consciousness isn't separate from matter. It's what matter does to preserve information across time. We are the universe's memory. Through us, the cosmos knows its own history. Through myths, it tells its own story. The myths your ancestors told weren't just stories. They were memories, real events encoded in genetic memory, passed down through thousands of generations, surfacing as universal archetypes in the collective unconscious. The flood happened.
The sky burned, serpents of DNA coiled through human consciousness. 7 sisters wheeled through ancient skies, watched by human eyes that still see them today. And you carry all of it within you, in your DNA, in your dreams, in the myths that still move you without knowing why. You are the living library of human experience, containing memories that stretch back to the birth of consciousness itself. Science and mythology aren't opposites. They're different languages describing the same truth, that memory is more than personal, consciousness is more than individual, and the stories we tell are echoes of the cosmos remembering itself through us. This is Myths of the Cosmos. If you want to explore more mysteries, where ancient wisdom meets cutting-edge science, where genetics meets mythology, where memory spans millennia, subscribe to our channel. Because the universe has stories to tell, and we're finally learning to hear them. Until next time, remember, the myths aren't dead. They live in you. You are the cosmos, remembering.